Mr. Abbott, setting aside some of your earlier comments on climate change, you said here in this press club in January that climate change is real, that humanity is contributing, and that strong, effective policy is required to deal with it.
Thank you for remembering what I said, Peter.
I'm happy to quote you back to you anytime, Mr. Abbott, particularly when I can get you to tell us if you're going to honour your commitments, because you and the government have both committed to cut carbon emissions by a minimum of 5% by 2020 and up to as much as 25%, depending on international progress. Under global negotiations, Australia will have to decide next year on the next phase. Will you keep your commitment? If there is global progress, will you agree to cut carbon emissions above and beyond the 5% target? And Mr. Rudd, a part of that question for you, what would you do to help prepare Australia for climate change impacts?
Well, Peter, I'd rather deal with the facts rather than with hypotheticals. We will reduce emissions by 5% by 2020 through what we call direct action, rather than through a great big new tax. Or it's not a new tax now, it's an existing tax, and a tax that's just going to increase if Mr. Rudd gets re-elected to $38 a tonne by 2020. We will do this by going to the market and purchasing what we think are cost-effective ways of getting reduced emissions. More trees, better soils, smarter technology. That's what we'll be doing. We will deliver the 5% reduction. If you actually look at the modelling that Mr. Rudd's government released back in 2011, under the carbon tax, our domestic emissions go up by 8% by 2020, not down by 5%, and you've got to buy about $3.5 billion worth of carbon credits from abroad to get the reduction that they're seeking.
Your commitment rather than Mr. Rudd's. If there is international progress, would you keep your commitment to consider cuts above and beyond the 5%?
Well, we've always said that if circumstances change, we will adjust appropriately, but there is no way that other countries are embracing the kind of carbon tax and the kind of emissions trading scheme that Australia has. If anything, the trend is all the other way. And if you look at what's happened in this country of ours, our emissions intensity has reduced by some 50% over 2 decades because companies have tried to make sensible savings in their energy usage.
Prime Minister.
Well, climate change is central to Australia's future. I spoke before about the need for a new way to embrace the challenges of the future. Let me tell you, climate change is there front and centre. And we will be doing a disservice to our kids and our grandkids if we do not act. That's why we brought in the mandatory renewable energy target of 20%. That's why we now are moving towards an emissions trading scheme. That's why, despite the Howard government being in office for 12 years, I, as one of my first acts, ratified the Kyoto Protocol. These are important measures, important steps, and we've never doubted the science, unlike some. On the key question of impacts, which Peter went to before, what really frightens the hell out of me, to be blunt, is in my own state of Queensland, the impact on the Great Barrier Reef over time. It's a very fragile ecosystem. It's been knocked around by storms and extreme weather events, which may be the product of climate change, according to CSIRO scientists. That is, more extreme weather events, the more climate change intensifies. And so we therefore have no alternative but to act collaboratively with the rest of the world.
And your willingness to increase the target if the rest of the world shows action?
Well, we honour our international obligations and we will make a careful judgment about what the rest of the world does. Can I just also correct just a figure before? Mr. Abbott was pointing to increased carbon prices. We're moving towards an emissions trading scheme. I've announced the abolition of the carbon tax. That would bring down the price from $26 a tonne to $6 a tonne. That's a fact. People just need to be aware of that.
You do forecast it to increase.
But hang on, can I just add one other thing too? Mr. Electricity emissions under the measures we've taken in this country have already been reduced by 7%. I'm further advised that under the policies we've had now in place for several years, carbon emissions are stopping increasing. Now, we are starting to see the product of real policy at work for our kids' future.